Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A few things I'd like to point out. We are in a new room for many of us, and unlike the Alumni Center, where some of the emergency exits are obvious, I'm going to point out that this room has two emergency exits, one through the door in which many of you entered. The other is back up the stairs, and that goes out to another set of stairs down into the outside. So, a safety moment so that you become a little more familiar with this particular room. Professor Reed, Daniel Reed, or Dan as he likes to be called, is joining us today, and he is currently the University Computational Science and Bioinformatics Chair at the University of Iowa. He has served for 6 years as the Vice President for Research and Economic Development at Iowa, where he was responsible for the entire research enterprise that comprised $450 million a year in research expenditures. He also served as the corporate vice president for Microsoft, where he led the global technology policy team and built international research partnerships on cloud computing. Now, prior to his brief 5 years of research leadership in industry, he also served as the Vice Chancellor for Information Technology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, as well as the Director of the Renaissance Computing Institute and a Chancellor's Eminent Professor. Prior to his position at UNC Chapel Hill, Professor Reed served for 5 years as the Department Head of Computer Science, the Director of the National Computational Science Alliance, and the Director of the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. After starting his academic career at UNC Chapel Hill, he moved to the University of Illinois in 1984, where he rose to the rank of professor. His many accomplishments include a significant number of patents and peer-reviewed publications, and he is a fellow of the Association of Computing Machinery, IEEE, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He has also served on the leadership teams and steering committees of over a dozen national and international high-performance computing collaborative centers and projects. And he's been a visiting scholar with the World Bank, Indonesia's second university development project in Jakarta, and the IBM Watson Research Center. Dan received his BS from Missouri University of Science and Technology and his master's and PhD from Purdue University in computer science. Prior to starting his first faculty position, he completed a short postdoc at Purdue University. It's certainly my pleasure as chair of the search committee to welcome Professor Dan Reed to share with us his vision for Kansas State as the model 21st century land-grant university.
And we just started off inauspiciously as I dropped the microphone. Sorry about that. Thanks, Peter. And thanks for the chance to speak with you today. I'm going to wander around a little bit. I'm congenitally unable to stand behind podiums, and I hope we'll have a lively and thoughtful discussion today. The charge was to speak about a vision of Kansas State as the model 21st century research university. And I thought I would perhaps start by telling you a few things that aren't on my CV, because social context for what we do is everything. So I'm a first-generation college graduate. I grew up in a small town in Arkansas. Though I have Kansas roots and I still have family in Wichita, my father, like many Southerners, moved north after the Second World War to seek employment. He was a machinist at Boeing, and I was born in Wichita, though we moved back to Arkansas not long after that. As Peter said, I'm a product of public universities, and I would still be working at the sawmill if it weren't for what public higher education had done for me. It's true of my wife as well. She's a daughter of immigrants. Her father escaped Stalin's grasp at the end of the Second World War, was the only one of his brothers who didn't wind up in Stalin's gulag. So she too, a product of public higher education. When I'm not being an academic, I write. That's one of my hobbies. You can read some of my musings on my blog. I'm also an avid amateur astronomer. So I have an observatory in my backyard, spent a lot of late nights taking photographs for fun. It's a mix of the poet and the scientist in me. Peter talked a little bit about my technical background, and I won't belabor all those points, but I did want to point out a couple of things that might be of interest. You know, at Illinois, one of the things that we built in my time at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications was something called the PSP program, the Private Sector Partnership Program. We work with Fortune 50 companies on real-world problems. They range from everything from the design of early cellular telephony systems to looking at logistics and supply chain management, rational drug design. We tried hard to convince Kodak that digital cameras had a future. We didn't succeed in that. But it was about building real-world partnerships with companies. Was very much proud of that. I went to North Carolina not to be a CIO, but to found the Renaissance Computing Institute. And the whole idea of RINCI, as we called it, was, as the name suggested, to bring together people from diverse disciplines to attack complex problems. That included looking at disaster response challenges, as we think now about rising ocean levels and coastal storm surge and flooding, early days of genetics and personalized medicine, industry partnerships as well, but also collaborations in the arts and humanities. I was a reluctant corporate VP. I turned down Ballmer and Gates twice before I ultimately said yes. And I spent a lot of time really being a Secretary of State for the company, traveling the world, talking about futures and challenges as technology disrupts our society. One of the things that was a piece of that that's also interesting, we ran a program called the Innovation Outreach Program, and it partnered with CIOs, not the Chief Information Officer type, but Chief Innovation Officers, people at companies who were charged with lying awake at night and thinking what might put their company out of business, and how to talk about those in a thoughtful way, cross domains, to think about collaboration. So I've spent a lot of time at the intersection of multiple disciplines. That's been one of the really wonderful things about being a computer scientist is its broad applicability. So I've had collaborations in the arts and humanities, the sciences, physics, engineering, medicine, over the last 30 plus years. And that's been a lot of fun in lots of different ways. One last thing before I talk about the core topic today. You can look at these slides later in depth. These are a few of the things that we did at Iowa. I'll highlight just four. One, working with faculty in our journalism school and professional journalists to talk about how do you explain succinctly and in lay terms to a broad audience what it is you do and why it matters, right? So that notion of explaining relevance and what we do in a land-grant world is increasingly important. I put a mobile museum on the road to travel the state to take research and scholarship to communities around the state. Rejiggered our internal funding initiatives to focus on high-risk collaborative ventures, and built something that we call Merge and Proto Studios, a partnership among the state, the university, and the community to support co-working spaces for startups, and in the case of Iowa, which was heavily biomedically focused, on medical device prototyping to support industry in this state. And I'd be happy to talk about all of those in more detail. But let's cut to the issue. So my grandfather always told me that when you talk to people, you should tell them what you're going to tell them, you should tell them, and then you should tell them what you told them. So here's me telling you what I'm going to tell you. And it is fundamentally that it is crucial for those of us in academia at public universities, particularly land grants, to engage the great societal debate that's taking place about whether public higher education is in fact a public good or a private good. And that's a question 20 years ago I would not have believed we would be posing as a society, but we are now. And I'm absolutely convinced that it is a public good. But one other thing I've learned over the years about debates is the group that poses the question dominates the outcome. And if we are reluctant participants in that conversation, External forces will shape the outcome that determines our future. And so it's important to be thoughtful, engaged, and collaborative as we talk about that future, because there is no doubt in my mind that the social compact between society and public higher education is in dramatic flux. And how we respond to that will not only determine the value proposition we deliver to society in the future, but it will determine society's willingness to support and engage us in turn. So with that backdrop, what are some of the things that I'm going to tell you that I think are important? One is that we must engage and support our students in all of their diversity. And I'm not just talking about it in a cultural or a racial sense, but if you think about the student base that we have, it is hugely varied socioeconomic context, background, experiences. I think we often tend to homogenize our population and treat it all the same. A minority of our students statistically now come from what we would expect maybe 30 years ago to be the traditional path to higher education. So how we think about supporting and nurturing them and ensuring success is crucial to our future. Because there are few things worse than spending time in college, emerging a year or two later as a dropout with large student debt. You failed to punch the union card that gives you entree to a whole lot of jobs. We can have a conversation about whether that should be the union card or not, but it is de facto in many contexts. And strangled by debt. The real issues about how we address that. How we think about not just 6-year graduation rates, and I will tell you, I think we have accepted that conversation about 6-year graduation rates as a false premise. We have to talk about 4-year graduation rates, and in some cases 3- and 2-year graduation rates, as we think about partnerships with secondary schools to allow joint credit, how we think about more extensive partnerships with community colleges, because the sooner we get productive citizens out in society, the less debt they have, the more impact they can have. But when we accept that 6-year premise, we've committed ourselves to a debt structure and a set of consequences for our students that I do not think has to be true. And I'm not unaware of the challenges associated with funding and other things associated with that. I'm a big believer in big ideas, team-taught courses. I think all too often we leave our students siloed. It takes a very wise and experienced individual to integrate disparate topics that we teach them. There's an opportunity to bring multidisciplinary exposure to a lot of our undergraduate education as we bring our faculty together to talk about those ideas in a societal context. The other challenge I think that's incumbent upon us as a land-grant institution is to think about what the effects of accelerating change and globalization are. The notion that we would give you the skills at 22 or 23 that would serve you a lifetime is no longer true. The only sustainable skill we give you is the ability to teach yourself new things and to learn those new things over a lifetime. With the rise of the gig economy and the notion that you would have not just 1 or 2, but 4, 6, 8, maybe 10 different jobs in your career, how we provide just-in-time skills refresh for a population that's increasingly economic stratified, I think will in goodly part determine our societal benefit and also the support that we receive. In terms of research, how we think about defining not just disciplinary thrusts, but larger scale, multidisciplinary thrusts that bring together people across areas and domain to attack big ideas. And there's no substitute for quality. There is a huge difference between being pretty good and being excellent. And it's not just a small delta, it is an exponential difference. So how we collaboratively talk about what our future should be, where we will make investments to build disciplinary and multidisciplinary pillars of excellence is a piece of that. The NBAF is being built here. I think that is a long-term opportunity to build collaborations around that. That is a new potential strength. I'm a big believer, as you might gather from what I said at the outset, in the importance of applied R&D partnerships to work with businesses large and small to attack real-world problems that deliver societal value. And I will say that I think we have to extend our notion of engagement in a much more aggressive way and integrate it across all of what we do. because it is our point of presence to engage people across all of the state, but certainly across society writ large. Because in the end, it's about how we serve individuals, communities, businesses. We are stewards of both our children's future and of our society's future. And it's that partnership that will shape things. You can now go to sleep. That's what I'm going to tell you today. So let me say a few things about, and you can tell I want to wander. I keep wanting to look back at the screen to remind me of a few things. Think about the origins, the true origins. Two things defined our society. Agriculture, which for the first time allowed us to shift from a hunter-gatherer society to stability, communities, towns, ultimately cities, and writing. Writing arguably created history, because for the first time, we were able to move beyond the oral transmission of knowledge from generation to generation. We could preserve it, we could protect it, we could extend it. And we in universities are stewards of that. The notion that we in a research university create new knowledge. We ask questions for which there have been no answers before. We transfer that knowledge to a new generation of students. We educate. And we engage society with the fruits of that labor. And that notion that we are stewards of our children's future and of our society's future, those are special things. And all of us who are researchers and scholars know that in the moment of discovery, you can live a lifetime. And 1,000 lifetimes would not be enough. Those are the defining attributes of what we are as public research university. And so our roots are deep in a literal sense, but also a metaphorical sense. I believe that research, scholarship, and teaching are one, and that's one of the reasons I'm such a passionate believer in experiential and undergraduate research experiences, because all too often we draw artificial distinctions between those two. Inclusion in all of its sense defines and empowers us, and lest you think I'm a geek, I believe passionately that the arts and humanities illuminate the human condition, because in the end, there are really only three questions in this world, which I describe as matter in the universe, life and its processes, and the human condition. And even those are deeply, deeply interrelated. We are creatures of innovation and the knowledge economy, and we're partners in the future. And I believe passionately that although Kansas and the US are places that America and Kansas State are evolving dreams, right? And it's incumbent upon us to not only believe, but to support the reality that every child's future is defined by the content of their character, the magnitude of their talent, the scope of their dreams, and their willingness to work. That's the holy thing in a very secular sense that we do. So what are some of the big things that shape our world? Because universities, for all of the rocks that are thrown at us about being ivory towers, we live in the real world. So what are the things that are shaping our world? One of them is urbanization. Over half the people on the planet live in cities today. By 2050, 70% of the people will live in cities. An increasing fraction of those will live in megacities, cities with over 10 million people. Urbanization is reshaping our world. Globalization. 50 years ago, the global economy was loosely coupled. It is intensely globally coupled, and it is economically efficient in a ruthless economic sense. What happens any place on the planet affects every small business in Kansas, and it does so almost instantaneously. There are good things about global economic efficiency, but there are social and economic disruptions from it too. We increasingly see disintermediation. How many of you went to Blockbuster to buy some videos as opposed to Netflix or streaming? Where do you get your news? How many of you bought stuff from Amazon as opposed to going to the local retailer? Disintermediation is affecting business, the way we communicate, and a bunch of other things in profound ways. Many of those things have led to socioeconomic stratification. Much of the angst that we feel in the country now is in fact the two Americas. The people, and I would include us in this room, who have fared well post-recession. But there's a whole lot of other people who are really struggling. And they have never recovered and are, in some cases, dire straits. The pace of change is accelerating. Toffler's future shock is real. It used to be that big social and economic changes happened on a generational basis. Now they can happen in 5 years. And almost all of our human structures were designed to accommodate generational change, not to accommodate this dramatically rapid social change. So those skills that you learned at 22, they used to last you 30 years. They don't last you 30 years anymore. So how do we adapt to that world and think about supporting our students and our lifelong learners? All of those have led to social polarization. And against that backdrop, there, of course, is the reality that in many parts of the world, the population is rapidly aging. Certainly in most of the industrialized world. And in the US, if it were not for immigration, our population would actually be declining. So there are profound issues along those axes. Those are the social things that shape the world in which the future of land grants will live. But think about the technical ones. Automation. Manufacturing in the US is booming, but it's booming because of automation productivity. You need fewer people to make more things. And that's not just true of manufacturing, it's true of agriculture, right? The days of 40 acres and a mule, those died a long time ago, right? Industrial farming, precision ag, small number of people farm thousands of acres. So farmers as a percentage of the population have asymptotically gone to a very small percentage. But it's more than that, and this is another thing that we should think about deeply. Most routine cognitive tasks can be automated. It's the non-routine cognitive tasks and the service businesses that have sustainability. And so what I'm saying is, we've talked a lot in this country and around the world about the economic effects of automation on blue-collar workers. It's sweeping white-collar workers too. And that has implications for our educational future. The genomics revolution, bioengineering, biomedicine, the ability to engineer crops, to think about personalized medicine, orphan diseases, there are a huge set of things on the horizon there. I don't have to tell this audience about the importance of food in a global population that continues to rise. But against the backdrop of sustainability, because climate change will affect agriculture, it will affect habitable regions across the world. There are profound issues about aquifer depletion in agriculture in Kansas and surrounding regions. How we think about those issues are affecting our social dynamics as well. I run through that laundry list simply to say, this is the world of now and the future in which I think we should consider the role and functions of land-grant universities as we go forward, because we are not in isolation. We are in a world that is changing very rapidly. So I talked about the renegotiating the social compact and the reality, the question about whether public higher education is a public good or a private good. And we all know some version of this chart. State support has declined at almost every public institution in the country. And tuition and debt have risen. Tuition at Kansas State is still relatively low by national standards, but I'm sure student debt is an issue. There are other backdrops that affect us. Federal support for research as a percent of GDP is a 30 to 40-year low. People, as I said, are questioning that social compact and value proposition for higher education. And all of those issues I talked about the rate of change, are putting increasing social pressure on our supporters and our opponents. And so how do we engage those people in thoughtful conversation to shape their future and our future? That's the profound question in my mind about the present and future of public higher education, but in particular about land-grant institutions and our historic mission about serving the public. This piece over there from The Atlantic appeared last summer. It has a poll quote from me that talks about the challenges that Midwestern research universities face and how we might think about responding to those. So think about our history, and this is my attempt to capture the history of U.S. universities since the founding of the Republic. The history of U.S. higher education is one of punctuated equilibrium. And I sometimes joke we're inclined to believe that Moses brought a third tablet down from the mountain that described how we should, in fact, operate. But if you look at the history of U.S. higher education, it is one of periodic and profound change. In the early days, the 9 colonial colleges, I dare say none of us would be in a room like this because Harvard was created to educate clergy, and those were wealthy white men. If we think about what created institutions like Kansas State, the Land-Grant Act, those were really about bringing access to new knowledge to a much broader sector of the population than had ever been true before. Many people thought the GI Bill, which brought tens of thousands of GIs onto university campuses, would destroy U.S. higher education. It was, by any measures, perhaps one of the most profoundly powerful social engines of change that this country ever saw. It brought huge numbers of people into what we define as the middle class. And it reshaped how we think about what a university is as well. Most of what we think of as modern research and scholarship in universities, though, is in fact a Cold War creation. We think about our dependence on federal support and all its sources. The reality is, pre-World War II, most research and scholarship was supported by private philanthropy. And so that industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about was in fact a product of the Cold War. And as Vannevar Bush wrote in his famous essay, The Endless Frontier, no amount of defense investment will protect society without investment in exploring the future. I paraphrase that, but that's the essence of what he said. So our relationship with federal research was a recent thing. It's equally true on all our social sides as we think about the effects of the Civil Rights Act, about Title IX. It's been about diversification and inclusion and broadening of access. That's really who we are. That's what is at risk right now in a deep and profound way, and it worries me. What will we do about this? Because it has been the defining attribute of this country, that we have invested in the future of its citizens. And the country has been, throughout its history, a magnet, the best and brightest that this planet could produce. And they have been drawn overwhelmingly to our public research universities. So I say all this to say change has happened over and over again. And so there is no reason to believe that a public land-grant university 20 or 30 years from now has to or necessarily will look exactly like right now. Because history, if it's any indicator, says that was never the case. And that's why I say the questions don't change, but the answers do, right? This is a quote from the Morrill Act, and it was about promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes. That's as true now as it ever was. That's the business that we're in. So how do we think about this future? And I'll come back now to the pragmatics. Frame the debate. That's how I started at the outset. We have to have a pragmatic conversation about where we are, where we want to be, and what society needs. We have to collaboratively define shared goals. That means not only among ourselves, but with our constituents and stakeholders. And then we have to galvanize the community to realize that future, recognizing that the 21st century land grant rests on the 3 verities that have defined higher education, and in particular land grants, from their very beginning. We create, we transfer and educate, and we deliver value. That's who we are. which is really all this slide says in another way. We create new ideas, we transfer knowledges and skills, and we deliver insights and solutions. And I've tried to say a few words there about what I think are some of the defining attributes going forward. We have and must continue to support both curiosity-driven and outcome research and scholarship. I do think we have to think much more intentionally about lifelong education and just-in-time skills delivery. I mentioned experiential team education and big ideas and undergraduate scholarship experiences. We have to be more honest about 2-4-year graduation rates and what we do about that. I will throw out a radical idea and then you can heckle me in the Q&A. There's nothing sacred about a 4-year degree. There's a world in which we could deliver 2-year degrees, and I don't mean community college degrees. I mean focused 2-year degrees that aim at delivering skills to people to get them out in the workplace. In the same way that we stole the PhD idea from the Germans, there are opportunities to rethink graduate education too. And so those things have to be on the table as we think about the future. They're not sacred. There's value in those and they've stood the test of time, but there are opportunities to think about those futures as well. And then how we attack societal problems and deliver real value is a piece of that. So I'm not a big fan of management slogans, but I do believe this one, that the way you have conversations and drive futures about that, you have to have a vision of where you want to go, and that has to be developed as part of an in-depth collaborative conversation. If you don't have that, all you wind up with is confusion. You've got to have the skills to do it. You need some incentives. It's like going to the gym. If you start with just the pain, you won't stay very long. There's got to be some reward to go along with it. You have to have the resources to do it, and you have to have a plan to make the ideas real. Because one of my old friends said, a vision without execution, it's just a hallucination. So you have to be concrete about those. And and what it comes down to is you have to mix a little Don Quixote vision and belief with some Sancho Panza pragmatism, because at the end it's the pragmatism that actually delivers the result. So this is really the crux of what I wanted to say. It's a version of what I said at the outset, that as we think about audacious ideas, disciplinary and multidisciplinary, I'm a big fan of Renaissance groups that bring intellectual assets to bear to attack these wicked, interdependent, complex problems that shape our future. I talked about team teaching of big ideas, the applied R&D partnerships that we solve real-world problems, that we can protect business information, and we understand that sometimes there are distinctions between scholarship that leads to publication and intellectual collaboration that leads to societal and business outcomes. Those are not always the same thing. And then as I said at the outset, I'm a big believer that 21st century extension and outreach have to be about those collaborative partnerships that will deliver real value. I talked about just-in-time education. I'm also a big believer in practicums for students that are beyond just scholarship, but internships and engagement with society on problems. So how do you do that? Well, so this is my philosophy. You can look at the details in the slides. Besides bringing some humility and respect to the process of talking about where one might want to go, we're in the dreams business, whether it be for our students, for our collaborators, or frankly for one another as we pursue our own research and scholarship. We're in the business of reifying dreams. And the thing that I found most successful over the years is you sit humbly and you listen to people's dreams. You synthesize those opportunities, and you always recognize that to do that, it has to be we, it can't be me. We have to collaborate together to realize that. Ask the big questions. The little questions flow from the big questions. Where do you want to go? What's the strategy? What's the empowering vision in which people can invest? That will determine your future. And then practice. There is no substitute for talent. I talked about earlier, one of the things that we have to do, even in a tight budget world, is we have to create liquidity, because liquidity is the way you invest in creativity. Nothing brings good ideas out of the woodwork more rapidly than when good ideas surface institutional leaders respond with passion, enthusiasm, and support, you will get more ideas and it will snowball from there. We can talk about presence in the Q&A, but if we do all of those things, I think we'll wind up in a different place. A 21st century land grant that has a partnership among government, among academia, and among society that redefines the social compact that's now frayed, that lets us talk about knowledge creation and global reach, about lifelong education and skills refresh, about economic partnerships, about global competitiveness, and about solving these real-world social problems that changes a lot of the things that give us angst and ennui right now. Universities are extraordinary, special places. Where else can you have a conversation about CRISPR and gene editing, about custom nanomaterials design, about 20th century Russian literature, about postmodern art, and then go to lunch? There is no other place like that. That's what makes us incredibly powerful societal assets. If we do those things, Kansas State, and I believe this, or I wouldn't be standing here, can in fact be the model 21st century research university, because it is, as all research universities are, it's a blank slate for dreams. It's a magnet for talent. It's a framer of the debates. At its very best, it is a transformative social and human force. And it's a crucible for discovery and innovation. And finally, it's an engine for our economy. That's what a 21st century land grant can, and in my mind, must be. And with that, I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Reed. And at this point, we'll open the floor to questions and discussion, keeping in mind that so that our audience who is not here with us this afternoon, but watching us streaming, is able to hear the questions, please give me a chance to run up the stairs and hand you the microphone. Or Tim, who is way up in the back, will assist me as well. Yeah. You two can't ask questions.
Come on, don't be shy. There are no bad questions.
There's only bad moderators, right? Okay.
Hi, my name is Sarah Riffergetti. I'm with Communication Studies. We have undergone this K-State 2025 for many, many years. How does that overlay on the plan that you propose?
Oh, it's a great question. Let me say a few things about the plan first as a prelude to answering your question. I read the plan, I read the institutional assessment that predated the plan, and I have read the milestone reports, the annual and the 5-year ones about progress against the milestone. I was impressed by the clarity of the notion about where the institution wanted to go, and the audacity, because it's a fairly bold vision about where the institution could go. I think what I said dovetails directly with it, because if you look at those things, the notion about, for example, re-envisioning what outreach is one of the pillars of the plan. That's what I'm talking about, how we do much more societal engagement. Now, how we think about elevating the quality and the reputation and the resources of the research and scholarship units across campus. It is about how we define those disciplinary themes and the interdisciplinary collaborations that put resources behind it. To galvanize those resources, we have to do more than engage ourselves. We have to engage our outside stakeholders, because they're the ones, not to put too fine a point on it, with the money. And they have to be invested in the things that we want to do, and that's where that back and forth has to take place about partnership. And in the end, I would say that the last thing that maybe is a bit tangential, but I think is really crucial about that engagement piece is we often in academia fall into what I would describe the academic trap about selling ideas. So if I explain something and you don't look like you believe me or understand it, my instinctive impulse is to go back and omit the steps of explanation that I thought you would infer from what I said, and I'll explain a little more detail and a little more carefully, and of course you will immediately leap to the conclusion that I want you to have. The world doesn't work that way. And so we have to engage people not only intellectually but emotionally about how we're going to change their lives. So that notion of disciplinary and interdisciplinary investment to create quality, how we think about outcomes for our students, how we think about societal engagement, I see those as directly aligned. So if you're asking the subtle version of, do I think the plan is wrong? No, on the contrary, I think it's the right plan. The devils are always in how plans meet the real world. You know, the old saw about no battle plan survives contact with the enemy in a war is true about strategic plans. They're living documents, and they adapt and evolve based on the progress you make, the experiences you have, the resources that emerge. As I said to some groups earlier, I'm a big believer in what, I hate this name, that some people call BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. You can see why I hate the name. But I love the idea, and the characteristics of those big, hairy, audacious goals, one is they have success criteria. You know whether you actually did them, and that's important to have milestones and metrics, and the plan has metrics and milestones. The other interesting ones about big, hairy, audacious goals is externally, people have to doubt their achievability. Because if everybody believed this thing was doable, someone else would have already done it. The other thing is they have to be internally believed as achievable, because that's how you engage people internally to go actually do the thing. And so that's where the ongoing dialogue about the plan, are these the right goals? Do we need to change these milestones? Are we making progress? But most importantly, and I can't overemphasize that, are we emotionally invested in this outcome? Because I've learned nothing else over the years. You can put all the plans in place, you can put all the resources in place, you can line up all the stakeholders. But if people don't wake up at the beginning of the day and say, I'm on the adventure of my life, you know, I do this for free because I cannot imagine anything else more exciting. If you don't have a core set of people with that passion, things dissipate. But with that, the resources are less important than you think. And I'm not naive about the budget challenges that higher education and K-State faces, but it's that passion and belief and commitment in the outcome of a plan that drives things forward. There will be a quiz later.
I'm Elizabeth Dodd, and I'm from the Department of English. I'm interested in this 2-year degree possibility, and I'm guessing that's one of the BHAGs that might be lurking around the edges of this talk. But partially with that as one of the possibilities on the table, could you talk, and in particular because I often hear students talking about needing to get their basic requirements, and often that means their humanities, out of the way. Could you please talk a little bit about your view of the humanities in your vision for where we might be going in renegotiating the compact of the public institution?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the 2-year degree is an idea. And let me tell you 2 stories as backdrop to the question. Remember all the hype about massively open online courses a few years ago? And that came and fizzled. But there's still a lot of interest in alternative ways of delivering education. One of the things I think we sometimes struggle with, and it's why I started at the outset by saying we have a differentiated student population. The son or daughter of a wealthy or powerful person, they have to work really hard to screw up in college before their future is ruined. Someone who's a first-generation college goer, who's in debt, if they screw up, it has lifelong consequences for them. And that's the reality, increasingly the latter, of our student populations. So how we are sensitive to those things is really important. Where I was going with that is, in the MOOC conversation, we often compared the platonic ideal of the perfect, individualized personal instruction with dedicated faculty members. We don't often deliver that. I mean, the reality is much more varied. It exists, but we have the converse as well. So thinking about the choice between no education or some education that creates value is a very real practical question for some of those people. That's sort of part one. Would that we did not have to make that Hobson's choice. I grew up in a world where I watched a little girl in me in the 3rd grade. The teacher told her, "I won't grade your homework anymore because you're reusing your paper." I watched her practice her multiplication tables on the unpainted sides of her house because that was the only surface she had. That notion of the unspeakable choices about food for a child or paper for an education is unfortunately all too real in parts of our world, and that troubles me greatly. Now let me get to the crux of your question about humanities. So I'm a computer scientist. When I came back from the evil empire of Microsoft to Iowa, which is the first order of a arts and humanities campus with a big biomedical complex. It's got the #1 creative writing program in the country. You can write into Pulitzer Prize winners walking down the street. There was a great fear on campus of the, oh my goodness, an unwashed Neanderthal geek is descending upon us. We're doomed. And I knew that wasn't true, but I also knew it was incumbent upon me to dispel the perception of that, much less the reality. Look, the humanities are a core part of what we do. It's why I said there really are only 3 questions in the world: matter in the universe, life and its processes, and the human condition. And the humanities are about illuminating the human condition. Part of the business that we're in is about creating well-rounded citizens, teaching them critical thinking, giving them a sense of history and context, giving them writing and communication skills that in many cases is more important than anything else they walk out of here with. That defines who we are. And I am in no way suggesting that we ever waver in our support for that. So I'll just jump up and down and say that. All I meant was we do have real choices about the economics that face higher education. What's important is that we have thoughtful conversation about a variety of scenarios, because it's not a binary choice of the perfect or nothing. There's a continuum that faces our students, and we must address that in a realistic context. And there are creative ways to do that. That's why I knew that idea would generate a question, and that's why I threw it out, because I wanted some provocative conversations about how we think not only about what we are, but about what we could be. And if you doubt I care about writing, that's what I do for a hobby. That's what I said at the outset.
Hi, thanks for coming to K-State. My name is Lori Getch. I'm Dean of Libraries here. Could you tell us how you go about making administrative decisions and maybe give us an example of a particularly difficult decision you had to make as an administrator?
Sure. In the end, it's about partnership. So a lot of it is an operational process. It's task forces, it's committees, it's discussions, it's synthesizing ideas over time. I can tell you operationally within my office, as I said to several groups today, I am a what you see is what you get guy. So there are very few secrets that I protect. There's sometimes personnel issues or other things that for legal or other reasons you can't talk about those, and you shouldn't. But everything else, it's like, let's lay the issues out on the table. Tell me what your best ideas are. And we will emerge with some amalgam of those things that we have all been invested in. I'm a big believer in the principle of least surprise, which is when actions take place, someone has to make a choice. It might or might not be exactly what you or I would do, but it would be in the space of things we would have considered reasonable given the circumstances to choose. The principle, when you violate that surprise, is when you have conflict and challenge. It's when people go, what the? Why do they do that? Right? And that's where communication is really important. Sharing context, getting input about the ways you go about it. And that's what I spent a lot of time doing. When I first arrived on the Iowa campus, I spent most of the first 3 or 4 months walking around campus, going to people's offices and sitting down and saying, I have no emotional baggage attached to this place. I just arrived. Tell me the good, and more importantly, tell me the bad. All right? So the good, I'm glad to know, and we'll try not to screw that up. But the bad might be something I can do about. Talk to me about that. And people were. They were candid, and we made some changes because of that. But I created a bunch of new advisory committees. I created a humanities advisory committee to engage the humanities, because it felt like in the office I was running, that's largely focused on the mechanics of externally funded research, that the humanities were getting the short end of the stick, and tried to change that, both by some internal funding initiatives. One anecdote I'll mention: when I arrived, I was stunned to discover that faculty experienced a financial penalty if they accepted a Fulbright scholarship. Stop that quickly. It's part of how we support the diversity of scholarship. But it's managed by walking around, getting people to talk to you. First lesson I learned at Illinois, and I've said this many times since, is if you're a leader of any kind in an organization, you want to be the first to hear bad news, not the last. If you're the last, then people have written you off and you're out of the loop. If you're the first, it means they've come to you because they have faith that you might be able to help address the problem, and they want to do that early. And so it's maintaining that trust that whatever the issue, they will get an honest hearing, and that you will engage all the stakeholders to talk about how it can be addressed in some meaningful way. It doesn't always mean that the outcome people will want will accrue, because you can't do everything, and sometimes there are reasons, as I said, that you can't talk about why you have to do certain things. But it's about honesty. That's what I was trying to say in my philosophical piece briefly. It's about trust and humility. It's about building partnerships. Yes.
Hi, that's loud. Hi, I'm Laverne Bitsy Baldwin. I'm in the College of Engineering. I'm director for the Multicultural Engineering Program. Thanks for coming out and putting your application in at K-State. I have a question about diversity and inclusion. And so when I read your letter and you talked about audacious goals, I put diversity right next to it. So what have you gleaned from our websites and our about where we are with respect to diversity and inclusion, and maybe what are some of the goals that you've been a part of, and what do you see for K-State?
Short answer is there's a ways to go. There are challenges now and in the future. So K-State, much like Iowa, has challenges by virtue of the context in which it exists. Kansas is a pretty homogeneous standard area, and so that has some pretty important implications. And that's why I was talking about the diversity of student population. There is all of the potential axes of that, from gender diversity and equity. I will tell you, you ask about things I've done. Every place I have ever been in academia that I walked into, I discovered that my female staff were dramatically underpaid compared to their peers for the same roles. And that's not true anymore. But I was dismayed to see that. Computing is a place that has a horrible record for gender diversity, in fact, more broadly for inclusion. I put my money where my mouth is in supporting various groups for gender equity in computing, literally and metaphorically. I've been heavily involved and still on the advisory group for a group that focuses on people, minorities and people with disabilities in IT, and how we broaden that base. When I was at Illinois, I was part of a large multi-institutional partnership that had a multi-million-dollar annual diversity initiative that was focused mostly on K-12 education, about trying to bring a broader base of students into STEM fields. At Iowa, I've held town halls about the challenges of faculty of color living in a community that's overwhelmingly white. And one of the messages I've preached over and over again is you don't spend your entire life within the halls of the university. You go home, you live in the community, and there are all kinds of things from the gross and blatant discrimination to the subtle things that even well-meaning colleagues do that can have pernicious effects. And we have to keep working on those things. So at Illinois, I focused on, when I was first a department head, I focused on gender diversity and then on broadly bringing people into STEM fields. I did that at Microsoft. I've continued to do that at Iowa. One of the things that was really pounded into me at Microsoft was, and I said this to the groups this morning, and it wasn't that I didn't believe it, but I never saw it quite so aggressively put into action as I did in the corporate world. And it applies to the way we think about scholarship and education as well, and it's the following. The more diverse our workforce is, the better the products we build. And in the case of an IT company, it was if people who looked like a younger version of me were building all of our products, we were building it with the mindset and ethos of people who looked like a younger version of me. And so if we wanted to address all of those issues, I had a team as well that was looking on access to IT technology for people who were differently abled, who had hearing disorders or vision challenges, and how we fought with the federal government to let us implement things that solve problems as opposed to meeting regulations that we'd seen and experienced as piece of that story too. And so it's all of those things. And I agree with you. One of the challenges that communities like Manhattan have, and Iowa City has it as well, I used to talk at length to our chief diversity officer about the fact that often the goals, the low bar for inclusion is to make the university as diverse as the community. Well, in a place like Iowa City, and I expect true here, the university probably is already more diverse than the surrounding community. That's not enough. That's the lowest possible bar. Some students this morning talked to me about the challenges of globalization and that they needed more training and emphasis on how to work with diverse cultures, and whether it meant study abroad and all the engagement issues around that. It's another aspect of that global world, how we engage that. And one of the after dinner speeches I often give about the future has the following punchline. My grandfather told me, make new and original mistakes. You'll learn more and life's more interesting that way. Don't make the same old ones again. But the other one is hang out with people not like you that challenge your worldview, and you'll learn more from them than you will with the people who are like you.
Hi, I'm Don Boggs, the Associate Dean in the College of Agriculture.
Where are you?
I'm right here.
Oh, there.
So,
Sorry.
we had a former president that started every speech calling Kansas State University a student-centered research institution. I don't know if we've lost our student focus, but we have had 2 significant years of enrollment reduction, which has created a lot of angst in terms of budget and other things. First off, what would be your definition of being a student-centered research institution, and what strategies and steps would you initiate to try to restore Kansas State to be a destination of choice for students seeking higher education?
So those are slightly different but related questions, obviously. On the student-centered front, let's be honest in this room about the lie that we often tell ourselves in higher education. And, reward metrics, both reward and punish. So it goes back to her question earlier about strategic plan. The metrics you choose, they reward and punish what happens. And so if we think about it from what we reward our faculty for, one of the things I do believe is that we in public universities have largely defined our faculty reward metrics as isomorphic to those of our private university colleagues, which means, first of all, we want you to be a great scholar. We whisper in a smaller voice, do not be a lousy teacher, but we don't say be a great teacher. And then in an even smaller voice, we say you need to do some service. But to first order, we reward the scholarship. That's the coin of the realm in a research university. And I say that not to diminish, it's important because it is the defining attribute of a research university is that we do original research and scholarship. But the student-centered piece is about how we engage students. And it's more than just what we do in the classroom. It's more than just the quality of the instruction. It is why I was arguing in my presentation about the importance of undergraduate research and scholarship. It is a way for faculty and students to be deeply integrated together, because I dare say most of the students on this campus do not actually know what most of you do when you're not in the classroom. I know that's true at Iowa. And so that exposure actually gives you a real sense of what it means to work in the real world, because what is research? It's solving complex, interdependent problems that no one has obvious solutions to. Well, that's most of what you do in the real world, is you work in groups and you solve complex problems. So you get social skills from that, as well as some educational experience. So that's a piece of it. And then the last piece sort of goes to that experiential education. I'm a big believer in internships and engaging with society on things. How you support those helps round things. I was really proud when I was at Illinois that in the basement of our building, there were people building PayPal, there were people building YouTube, because we put a lot of money into supporting the student organization and building a vibrant life for the students that wasn't just defined by the classroom. Now, when we come to the second part of your question about enrollment, student base is changing for the reasons that I was talking about before, and urbanization is driving one of those things. And one of the great political questions, given what I know about the history and culture of K-State, that's predominantly recruited in-state, is honoring that social compact with the state support versus what are the realities of shifting population bases and out-of-state recruiting. What draws people to campus is the broad experience. I mean, Iowa recruits a whole lot of students out of Illinois. They come to Iowa because they want the Big Ten college experience, and there's no space for them in Champaign-Urbana. I think K-State has some of those same opportunities, while not ignoring the commitment to the citizens of the state. It also brings you a more diverse student base, potentially, and you get some of those other collateral effects of having that mix of people and cultures as you bring people together as well. But it's an unfortunate truth that our research and scholarship base now depends more on tuition, because as I said to the student shared governance group this morning, that often puts department chairs, deans, and university administrators in a Hobson's choice dilemma. Do we keep tuition low because we want affordability, but we also know that tuition is what's increasingly driving support for our faculty and their scholarship and research. And the quality of the faculty defines the quality of the degree, because in the end, think about the three things that we give students at any university. We hope we give them knowledge and skills, but we give them socialization, that's the other part of that out-of-class experience, and we give them brand equity. K-State has a brand, and that brand has social and economic value attached to every graduate. And that, in part, is tied to the success of the graduates, which in turn is tied to the quality of the education, but also how we transfer scholarship ideas out into the real world.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Dina Bonnell. I'm an assistant director at one of the 4 Feed the Future innovation labs that we have here at K-State in the College of Agriculture. And so you referenced sort of broadly the global world that we live in and how that ties into the public university. I wonder if you could speak a bit more specifically about the increasing need for international research, especially related to global food and agriculture, how that fits into K-State's vision and the role of the Provost in supporting that international research.
Well, engagement in those issues is, as I said, one of the defining attributes of land grant. I mean, it's written into the Morrill Act, right? The agricultural and mechanic arts. But that's a platitude. Let me try to be a little more concrete. I mean, the global explosion of population is a huge issue. You know, the question about what's the next generation of the Green Revolution is one that's out there, and it's deeply tied up with in part with some of the conflicts around GMO crops. I've been involved in some heated debates in Europe about GMO crops and the issues around that. But Europe's not really the issue. It's more the rest of the world. One collateral set of issues in that feed the world context is the other one I alluded to, which is climate change, rising sea levels in some parts of the world, like aquifer depletion, but just potable water in general that can be used for agriculture or human consumption are huge risks. Gates Foundation's poured a ton of money into those kinds of issues as well. This is one of those things that how we think about not just the technical aspects of Feed the World, but the social aspects of those that are tied to political governance in those countries that are facing food shortages, to the social dynamics about climate management and how we respond to greenhouse gas emissions and managing those things, public policy issues about land use, deforestation, that's a real issue in some parts of the world, that's having a lot of other domains. It's part of those things, and it goes in that category of big, hairy, audacious goals, right? The kind of things that other groups have defined have been environmental sustainability, how we sustain an aging population when the number of people paying taxes to support those is declining. I mean, those are big issues that have both technical and social components. So I'm a big believer that we have to not only sustain but grow those issues, but view them through that multidisciplinary lens that I was talking about. And that's both aided by, but also exacerbated by our global politics and the perception of the US and the world as a positive change agent. That has made many things, and I fear will continue to make things more complicated. But if you're asking the question perhaps in the same way she was about where do I stand on the humanities versus stand on agriculture, rest assured I'm behind it or I wouldn't be here. It's a core part of what K-State does. And I spent most of my career at Illinois, which is a big ag school too. I've spent a lot of time talking about those issues.
Good afternoon. I appreciated some of your comments today about lifelong learning. My name's Karen Peterson, and I serve as the Dean for Global Campus. And I wanted to just have you share with us your insights and perspectives. There was a study that was published a little over a year ago by the Chronicle of Higher Education. They surveyed provosts across the country. And one of the things that they reported is that 82% of provosts saw online education as a growth opportunity on their campus. Can you share with us your experience with online education, and do you see that as a growth opportunity here at Kansas State University?
Sure, the short answer is yes. I was involved in a risky but ultimately successful project in think about what's happened to global communication in the last 20 years as backdrop to what I'm about to say. In 1998 and 99, my partners and I at Illinois launched a global internet master's degree to India. And we really pushed the bleeding edge of the art to do that at the time. This is the days of dial-up modems, right? And we worked in partnership with the IITs in India to do that. And we had students who arrived on campus and participated at commencement. I've got photos with the university president. When they arrived for commencement, it was the first time they'd ever been on the Urbana campus. It was also a revenue opportunity because those students were able to get a US degree at a price point that was far lower than if they had had to come to the US, pay room and board and everything else. And we had some great partnerships with the IITs. Those of you know about the IITs, those are sort of the MITs of India. So it was a good collaborative partnership with some folks around that. So I was involved in that a long time ago. Get to the other part of your question. Yes, I believe for the reasons I talked about lifelong education, it's going to be crucial. Here's why, among many reasons. Think about first the adult education, and then I'll come back to the sort of the 18 to 20 something part. From an adult education perspective, if you're 45 and you need new skills, you're not going to come back to Manhattan for a degree. You could be financially constrained. If you're not financially constrained, you're almost certainly socially constrained by family or other kinds of ties to wherever you happen to be. So part of my question is, as we think about that notion of lifelong education, and technology I think has to be a huge piece of that, is how do we shift our lifelong relationship of our alumni from root for the Wildcats, and the Alumni Association will stay in touch and hope you'll contribute, to a much deeper lifelong partnership that says, when you became a K-State participant, we had a lifelong handshake agreement with you that we're going to be there for you for the rest of your life. And whatever happened, we were going to try to help you be successful. And part of that would be how we deliver value. Some of it is just-in-time education, recognizing that for most people, that's not going to be another degree. It could be a certificate, it could be a badge, it could simply be a skill that allows them to be competitive. And I think it's incumbent upon us to deliver that. The other piece, to speak to the more traditional learners, it goes back to what I was trying to say about the real-world challenges of economics. You know, how we think about delivering some of those courses that would reduce the amount of time that students have to spend on campus going into debt, where they can get the value of the degree without necessarily the indebtedness. And one of the other conversations we had at Iowa in that spirit was, how many credits do you have to take on the campus to get an Iowa or a K-State degree? Most places it's about half of the total credits for an undergraduate degree. We have articulation agreements with all kinds of entities, other four-year colleges, universities, community colleges. We truly have no idea what the quality of the education you got when you show up and say, I have credit in Calculus 2 or World History X. Right? We truly don't know. We just take it for granted based on, that's why we have certification and all the other stuff that goes with accreditation. We're taking that on faith. There are lots of ways we can use global education, online education, some just in time, some on presence mixed with remote, to deliver that value that I think in many cases can both expand the base of potential learners, which goes back in part to your question about how we address enrollment, but create that sense that we recognize that people have constraints, that they're not all the perfect student that's unencumbered by resource constraints or social reality, but still wants an education and needs one to be successful.
If no one else has one, I have one.
Sure.
It's more of a story. Years ago, in a meeting of deans, a provost walked in and related a story.
This is not like two people walking into a bar, is it?
Yeah, if you give me enough time, I'll
Okay,
get to
sorry.
that. And the provost was appalled because the provost had just run into a group of students who were looking for something on campus and told them where it was, and they said, well, who are you? And the provost said, I'm the provost. And they said, what's a provost?
Yeah.
So.
What's a provost?
And how present is the provost to the undergraduate population on the campus?
Two-part answer. A story I told some people earlier today. When I was first a department head, one of our young faculty members, it's true faculty as well, came up to my administrative office and said, in my mind, rather cheekily, what is it you do up here? And I thought about giving an equally perhaps snarky response, which I knew was not constructive. So I paused, I thought a moment, and I said, in part, my job is to fix problems before you know about them. Because if you know what I'm doing up here, I have failed you. My job is to make problems go away so you can focus on what it is you do. And so in part, and I mean this in all seriousness, for a lot of students it's important the provost, they don't know what the provost does. They're being successful, they're being good students, life goes on. That's part of the story. The other part is, look, university leaders at every level, the most important thing we do is not the bureaucracy. We set, along with the faculty, the tone and culture of the campus. We define by our actions and our words, but most importantly by our actions, the values that we treasure, that define who and what the institution is. So in that sense, you absolutely do not want the provost to be invisible. You want them to be very visible, to be seen, to be engaged. And even if the students don't really know what a provost does, you want the students to know that they have a friend. There's someone who cares about them and cares about the institution and cares about their future. And if they have problems, this is a place they can go to talk to people. I mean, that's true at every level. But that's the other part. That's the flip side of, it's good you don't know what I do, but it's good that you know I care and I'm accessible and I will help you if you have issues.
In some circles, the provost is the head jailer.
Mo Hasni, Mechanical Engineering. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. So even though you have studied and you have limited knowledge of K-State, as of today, what is one major strength of K-State and one major challenge for K-State, and how are you going to take that advantage and move it forward and remedy the challenge?
I think the strength, as I've seen, and as you qualified, I'm an outsider, and all of you have greater knowledge of the institution than I do. The strength that I've sensed talking to people is, in fact, their love for the place. The students, the faculty, and the staff, I've heard that from everyone. That's the thing that lets a community move forward, is that they are emotionally committed and invested in the place. The challenges, I talked about some of those. I mean, the core one is the resource base and how one addresses that shortfall and right-sizes the mission to match the reality. That one is the very real one, and that one goes to what does the provost don't do that you have to spend a whole lot of time on worrying about how to make sure that one addresses that. And that is tied up deeply with that social compact and how we reinvigorate that, because in the end, for K-State to be successful, it can't just be that the faculty and students love and invest and are invested in the institution. It really has to be true that the citizens of the state are equally love and invested in the institution because it's making their world better. And so that relates to how we engage them in this changing world, but it's the love of the people and the investment in things, and it is the resource challenge without doubt. All right, there's our winner.
I'd like to ask you to follow up on your comment about right-sizing the mission. So you're probably aware that we've seen a number of years of base budget cuts. And if such a base budget cut would be necessary while you were provost here, how would you go about deciding how to make a base budget cut? Would it be an across-the-board cut? Would you make strategic cuts? And if so, how would you decide? What would the logic behind making those strategic cuts be?
Yeah, really good question. First of all, I'll answer the first part really directly. I am not a fan of across-the-board cuts because not making choices is almost always a bad choice, in the same way that no strategy is a strategy, but it's not a very good strategy. You do have to choose, because if you make everything mediocre, you lose all of the things that define excellence. So you do have, if push comes to shove and you have to make choices, you do need to make them. Now, how do you do them? Well, there's both the process and where you make them. The process is what I was talking about in sort of my response to how do I approach management issues. It's let's put all the cards on the table, nothing up my sleeves. Here are the numbers, right? This is where money's coming in. This is where it's going out, right? If we turn this knob, this is what's going to happen. Everybody needs to understand those trade-offs, that these are going to be the trade-offs. But then you have to talk about where are the investments that actually would maximize the outcome, and that goes to how you make those crucial choices. Those can't be driven, in my judgment, just by the last-minute budgetary realities. They have to be derived from the strategic principles that define what the future looks like. And so the worst thing in my judgment you can do is say, oh my goodness, we have a budget cut. Okay, we're gonna have to cut X because of this. If you wait till that point to have that conversation about what your priorities are, you wait way too long. It goes back to that principle of least surprise. You want everybody to understand, we're committed to doing this, right? And everybody understands that. So that when you do have to make choices, like, well, we're committed to that. We need to do that, okay? So we're gonna have to suck it up in some other places because we cannot sacrifice this thing that we've already made intellectual and emotional commitments to, because it's our future, right? And that's gotta be that shared conversation. It's not easy. I would say the other thing sometimes is we are cruel to be kind. And by that I mean when we have to make budget cuts, and I've lived through budget cuts at Iowa, we're in the midst of a mid-year budget rescission right now, and it's gonna hurt some more. And which of your children do you love more? It sometimes feels like you're having that conversation. What I meant by sometimes we're cruel to be kind is we try to hide the pain sometimes by minimizing the cuts or spreading the peanut butter when I'm really mixing my metaphors now. That the old saw about don't waste a crisis, if you do have to make a budget cut, I am often in favor of making a larger cut than the minimum one necessary, because that's how you create strategic and discretionary investments for the future, right? And the worst thing that can happen in my mind when you get in an overly budget-constrained world is you squeeze all the liquidity out of the system. And I've seen that at the federal research level when it was no longer possible to get money to explore the unexpected. The whole process got incredibly conservative. And I've seen it in the university world where because you've cut, all the discretion disappeared, and when a good idea surfaced, you no longer had the money available to be able to support it. The last thing I would say, and I've tried to walk this walk, is every time I've had to make budget cuts, and I have had to make budget cuts the last few years, is one of my operating principles was I was going to try as best I could, and I would show everybody the numbers to back it up, that I was making differential cuts to the central office relative to the programs that I supported. Now there's some things like compliance with the animals in a medical school, you gotta do that, or the federal government will turn all your funding off, and that's a disaster for everybody. So there are some things you just can't skimp on. But places where I thought, this is a program I actually believe in my office, but I'd rather give it up than have to cannibalize one of these other programs, I will do that.
Thank you. Hi, I have another one for you.
Sure.
So state and national policy can have a very direct impact on our lives here and the work that we do, from U.S. trade policy and how that impacts, producers here in our state that we serve through research and extension, all the way down to what our gun policy is on campus. Yeah. And those are just two disparate examples. And so what do you see as the role of a public university and the strategies to engage in influencing policy, and specifically the provost's role in that as well?
Sure. Well, the provost may be first among many in engaging in those things. I'll make first a philosophical statement and then try to be pragmatic. I think one of the things that's happened in recent years is we in institutions have become somewhat gun shy about wading into controversial issues. And to some extent, it's because we've been slapped around by legislatures and other contexts for doing that. But if you look back to, take the social sciences, for example, if you look back in our history, the social sciences, not that they're not now, but in times past, were much more aggressively engaged in shaping social policy in the country than often they are now. It's the reason why I started with frame the debate. I think we have to go out and articulate positions, not in a dogmatic way, because that never gets you anywhere, but in the here's what the preponderance of research and scholarship says on this topic about what the consequences are of different trade-offs. That's the philosophical part. Now let me turn to the pragmatic part. I've spent a lot of time roaming the halls of the UN, of the Hill, and talking to members of Congress in the US, and various agencies around the world, as Peter read in my overly long intro. I hate it when people read long intros. I always sort of hang my head in embarrassment. So, but you have to start with understanding what the people want, and more importantly, what they fear. And by addressing their fears, and it could be something you do, it could be a problem they're facing, how do you help address that problem? You get political traction for them to help address your problem. So, as you would expect, I spent a lot of time talking about thorny political and technical issues at Microsoft with some people who weren't always predisposed to like the evil empire that was often the perception of a company like Microsoft in some parts of the world. I never started with here's what I think or here's what the company wants. I always started with tell me what's worrying you. You know, what's your country worried about? What's your agency worried about? What are you worried about? And let me see if there's anything I can do to help you. And it may, in some cases, be nothing more than listen to you express your frustration about something and sympathize, but other cases, there's actually something I could do about it. You build political debts, and at some point you can call them back in. And it's about that trust relationship. It's true at every level. It's how you interact on the university campus alone. You build trust. And there are debts that can be exchanged. So whether it be trade policy and talking about what we know about protectionism and the risks about that, what it means for global free trade and the benefits of that, or talking about other social issues, we have to engage. We are part of the body politic, and we have a responsibility to be engaged parts of that discussion. But at a very pragmatic level, it's start with how you can help people, build some political capital and trust with them, and then you can take advantage of that in a positive way, relationship, to draw on that political capital to get them to do some things for you. The other one that I would say is, in a lot of contexts, 10% is total victory. You got 10% of what you truly wanted, that is victory. You should go out and open the champagne bottles and celebrate, because rarely will you get everything. And the notion of being frustrated, angry, and expressing your displeasure when you got 10% of the perfect almost guarantees that the next time you want to try to get 10%, you won't get anything. Because those people have constraints. You may not always agree with them, but they're laboring under their own set of constraints. And you have to build some mutually beneficial relationship to shape those. But I believe we have to engage in those debates, whether it be about state level and local policies or national and international ones. And we've hid because we're afraid of being beaten up, I think, too often. Now, we can stick our heads in things that we have no business sticking our head in as well. So one has to choose battles wisely. There's no reason to make enemies simply because you have an opinion. The pain has to be worth the potential gain to be willing to weigh in. But that's how I've approached building policy. And one thing that I took away from that over the years, you know, when I walked in with seasoned lobbyists that Microsoft was paying, you know, 7 figures to go drive issues, was to have ambassadors say to me, "You're not like anyone from Microsoft I ever met before." And I'm like, I'm winning this, I'm gonna win this one, right? Because I had changed the perception by virtue of approaching it. How can we help you? As opposed to pillage your economy for more shareholder profits, which is what they feared.
Well, we are at the end of our time, so let's thank Professor Reed one more time.
Thank you.
And Dan, the next time I have the opportunity to introduce you, it will be, here's Dan.
There you go. Thank you, Peter.
For those of you who are in the room, we will have a reception where you can continue to assault our candidate out here in the open area. For those of you who are listening at home or at your desks, and for those of you in the audience, please remember to go to our website, fill out the evaluation forms. The search committee really values your input, and we would love to have your thoughts and perspectives on all of our candidates. So please take a few minutes to do that. Thank you very much.